Friends, now this is the time to start first symposium of the conference. The theme of this symposium is Globalization and the Emergence of a New World Order, Theoretical Formulations. In this session, we will focus on the first part of the theme we have proposed for this session. And we have Tom Wicker as chair to this session. I request Tom to come over on the dais and take his position, and then I will also be in chair for this session in place of Dr. Madhav Govind. Oh, acha, okay, yes. Okay, he is here. I thought he is not here. Okay, Professor Madhav Govind. And we have three speakers. Professor Victor Roudometof from Department of Sociology, University of Cyprus. He is online with us. And we have Professor Yeshi, Choedan, Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, School of International Studies, JNU. And we have Dr. Mona Sadwal, and she is in the field of education, I think. I request all the speakers to come on the dais and take their seat. And now I request Tom and Dr. Madhav Govind to proceed further for the symposium.
So welcome to the symposium. I suggest that we go straight into the papers to allow as much time as possible for discussion. Should we have the two speakers, so perhaps 20 minutes each, and then 20 minutes for questions and discussion. Sorry. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Okay. So Victor, do you want to take it away? Go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's nice to see you. Please let me know whether you can hear me.
Victor, I think you might be on mute.
Let's see now. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Working yet? Just a moment.
Yeah.
Do you want him to try now?
Okay, 1, 2, 3, test.
Talking again? Yeah.
1, 2,
try talking, Victor. Just see if the volume's right.
1, 2, 3, test. 1, 2, 3, test. 1, 2, 3, test.
Oh, okay. Our colleagues are working on it, Victor.
All right. Please let me know if you can hear me.
Yes. He should try again. Okay. Yes. Victor, could you try speaking again now?
1, 2, 3 test. 1, 2, 3 test.
Okay. We have the volume, but there's a lot of echo on it. So colleagues will just try and resolve that. Yeah. Okay. Victor, could you try again?
1, 2, 3 test. 1, 2, 3 test. I'm not getting any echo. I don't know if you can hear me. If the problem is the microphone, I could try to take this off, the headset.
So let's start properly. So please welcome Roudometof, and who's going to be speaking on digital globalization, theorizing the 21st century ICT revolution. Okay.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
We don't problem solved. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, even though I'm attending virtually. It's a great opportunity to participate, and let me jump right into the presentation. I think I can share my screen, which, I need you to enable me to share my screen so I can put the PowerPoint presentation on the screen. Whoever is in charge of who is the host. Mm. I don't seem to be able to share my screen. And I also cannot hear you. I cannot hear you.
Can you Victor, if you could try.
Yes, I didn't hear you.
Our colleagues have changed the settings, so.
Should I try? No, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
I can read my presentation, but you will not be able to see the PowerPoint presentation.
So someone has suggested if you could email the slides and we could run them from here.
Yes. I can do that.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, okay.
I just did that. I just did that. I cannot hear you. There is a tremendous amount of echo. I have a hard time understanding you.
Okay.
Hello.
So Victor, we're just going to change the order, so there's a chance. So if you haven't already, if you could email your slides, and then we're just going to slightly change the order of the speakers, because we've already got the other slides on the computer, and then by the time they finish, we should be ready to go with your slides. Okay, so if I could ask then, as the first speaker, Professor Yeshi Choedan, from the Centre for International Politics, Organisation, Disarmament.
Yeah,
okay.
What about my slides? Is this someone?
Yeah. So the next, you can respond that after 20 minutes.
No, but I think he's waiting. Like
Okay, he's waiting. Okay, then let's start. So let him.
मैंने अपना खुला हुआ मेरा अपना खुला हुआ हां ये वाले में लोग ग्रेविटी प्लस में दे रहे हैं
Should I write my title of the paper since it is not here? Yeah, I'll write it there so that, yeah.
Okay, I think we're ready with the slides, so ready for you to start, Victor. Sorry about all those issues.
Okay, I hope you can listen to me far better. That I'm getting a lot of echo, so hopefully you will be able to follow. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'll jump right in. My paper outlines a general theoretical framework that uses globalization as a bridge between global and local. The use of globalization to interpret the information communication revolution is not conventional, although the term has been in circulation in the literature for some time. We have no theoretically driven explication of globalization with regard to the domain of techno-social relations. And that is what I'm trying to do in the paper. It basically consists of 3 parts: a general primer on the notion of globalization, how digital globalization works, and exploration of the idea of a global internet. According to popular academic mythology, the term glocalization originated in Japanese business But there are alternative accounts that suggest that it might have come out of social ecology. Regardless, the main departure point in the literature is a chapter that was authored by the late Roland Robertson, where he wrote that the global is not in and of itself counterposed to the local, but what is referred to as the local is essentially included within the global. And so he suggested the idea that globalization involves the linking of localities. And in fact, the invention of locality itself. That became a very popular idea, and it has been reproduced in numerous research sites. In terms of the literature on in communication, glocalization is part of the broader problematic of the relationship between media and globalization. The dominant interpretation in the literature stresses the extent to which hybridity has become the cultural logic of contemporary globalization. But this interpretation is vulnerable to historical accounts, which stress the extent to which technologies of communication form an important component of humanity's long history. And that raises the question, what is really new? In particular, the information communication technologies' role in contributing to diffusion and hybridization processes is actually less novel than what it may seem at first glance. In fact, the growth of audiovisual media predates the development of computer networks. So, with that in mind, we need to reconsider the terms of the debate. Hybridity is omnipresent throughout history, and that makes it of limited value when considering the impact of globalization on human affairs. That becomes self-evident when we introduce the term glocal into discourse. Glocality necessitates the presence of two streams, one of which must be local. In contrast, there are numerous cases of hybridity where there is no local-global binary relationship. That means that the difference between the terms glocal and hybrid is significant and consequential. Well, invoking hybridity can attract criticism because hybridity is omnipresent in human history. The same criticism does not apply to the glocal. Now, in terms of the notion of glocalization and the new media traditionally associated with the information communication revolution, it is important to highlight that the notion of glocalization is part of the very inception of the new digital media. And I quote on the sixth slide in my presentation, Boyd's classic statement about the introduction of Web 2.0 back from 2005, because Boyd makes an explicit reference to glocalized structures. I'm not going to read it. I hope you will be able to read it on your own. It's on your screens. Let me move to the next slide. I see it, it's already in there. The quote from Boyd's classic pioneering statement demonstrates the relationship between the proliferation of digital media and the growing importance of glocalization. That is because applying the notion of global to information communication technologies is not an issue of mere adaptation to an externally imposed reality. It's the other way around. The making of the 1990s internet was shaped by historically embedded cultural discourses and varying political constituencies, plus a creative mix of romantic rebellion and capitalist spirit. The major changes of that era, as Streeter writes in his book on the invention of the internet, were very much anticipatory changes based on what people imagined could happen, not what had already happened. And the same, I would suggest, is the case with glocalization and its employment in the information communication technologies discourse. It has been invoked from the very beginning, and that has significantly contributed to the framing of current and future developments. In other words, we are living through a situation where this has become the way that the information communication technologies work. Now, while globalization has been connected to the notion of heterogeneity, the notion of difference, the notion of cultural fusion, right from the beginning, there is considerable ambiguity that has persisted regarding the conceptual difference between globalization and glocalization. And as I argued in my 2016 book on glocalization, my own take on this is that globalization can be conceived in terms of translocal waves that emanate from one locality and spread to others. When such waves pass through other localities, these waves can be thought of as refracted, thereby producing new forms of glocal heterogeneity. The glocal hybrids that result from this refraction are not always recognized as such. In fact, there are two different outcomes. Their cultural heterogeneity might assume two forms that depend upon, on the one hand, the extent to which hybridity or fusion forms the very foundation of a third, new yet distinctly identifiable culture. In such a case, when we have a new culture, even a technoculture, those hybrids are often understood as local. Versus the other option, when such hybridity leads to eclecticism or a personalized bricolage rather than a distinct new culture, in most those cases, the new hybrids are seen as glocal. They are recognized as glocal. I should stress that for a third-party observer, the difference between these two outcomes of heterogeneity might seem spurious. In the long run, such a difference between them is unfounded. Most of the time, authenticity is in fact constructed. It's not the result of parthenogenesis. But the difference between a new third culture and personalized bricolage is quite significant and real in the interpretations of the actors and the definition of the situation formulated by individuals. For information communication technology-based social interactions, the general tendency has been toward augmentation of pre-existing community interactions. ICTs assist in preserving weak ties and contribute to their reinforcement. The final outcome is a strengthening of locality, not its disappearance. For example, in India and China, internet users display a strong preference for locally produced online material, according to the sources I have consulted. The ICT revolution has popularized new media that are called locative, as well as the creation of digital places. Mobile media in particular are connected to people's sense of place through a variety of modalities of presence. The result is that placemaking becomes something people do in the context of their labor or their leisure through the use of information communication technologies, which is a rather new development for these technologies. It's certainly not a new development for humans overall. In contrast to the aforementioned form of placemaking, there is the other option, the one that I described as, Peters has described as cultural melange, and I have described it as global hybridity. In this case, social actors reflexively recognize global hybrids as such. They see them as new additions or forms that relate to non-local forces. This has been introduced in direct relationship to the conversation about the new information communication technologies, and famously, Meyerowitz has argued that in the 21st century, the evolution of communication and travel has placed an interconnected global matrix over new experiences so that we now live in glocalities, as he wrote. So in contrast to popular journalistic accounts, these glocal bubbles may have positive effects and not negative effects. That's usually what you read about in magazines. And the actors' employment in information communication technologies is not necessarily a sense of angst or distress. Here, the perception in the popular press is different than what is actually going on. Actor-driven information communication technologies are a prime model of digital globalization. Online mapping is perhaps the most ubiquitous case because this technology shifted since 2005 from GIS to information communication retrieval, which in turn operate through the user's consent. But this particular example is basically just emblematic of what has become over the last decade or so a major range of applications that are collectively referred to as geomedia. Geomedia is a hybrid term in itself, which indicates the combinations of GIS, geographic information systems, and media-driven applications. Following the introduction of internet access onto cell phones, geomedia was introduced in the field of communication and media and geography. For the most part, geomedia is a blanket term that includes all forms of mediatized communication that involve the spatial localization of information. Geomedia is basically about the digital localization of perspectives, experiences, representations, and interpretations. And there are many applications that have been developed in addition to the online mapping technologies. But I don't want to go in great detail, trying to keep up with the time, the constraints. Mobile media uses geomedia extensively, and that has rendered global hybridity omnipresent in contemporary life. That was made famous around the world with the Pokemon Go craze of 2016. But that is just an example here of what has been happening. This form of glocality combines site-specific digital information that is used to transform or augment the user's experience of physical space. Augmented reality has the potential in the future as well to blend the Internet of Things technologies with everyday life. The merging global templates and local scenery into a new third space that is simultaneously local and global. Augmented reality is something that I should say a few more things about, in large part because it has become easier to adopt augmented reality to everyday life than virtual reality. And in this connection, the pandemic has accelerated what there were already existing trends. Today, we see avatars routinely in use in newsrooms across the world, and we are increasingly see the augmented reality as part of the routine of everyday life. So this is something that is becoming very familiar to people all around the world. More broadly, the information communication technology revolution has made cultural and creative industries the biggest revenue source for the digital economy, especially after the Great Recession of 2008. The COVID pandemic has enhanced online options for remote work, and in this regard, the pandemic has accelerated what has already been happening. People anticipate, especially reports that have come out as early as 2017, that by 2050, these kinds of technology-driven productivity outcomes are going to help emerging economies overtake developed economies. And that is certainly something that has been pushed forward with the pandemic in terms of the timetable. I'm getting some, okay, all right, let me continue. As Stiger and James remark in their book on globalization, the widespread use of information communication technologies has contributed to what they call disembodied globalization. In other words, a situation where physical mobility and interconnectedness are disjoint. But instead of a global singularity, we might be moving in a situation toward a global or a glocalized internet. That is because there are numerous subtle forms of digital protectionism that are going on every day. These include examples such as blocking websites with controversial content. We've seen this with the Russia-Ukraine war. We've also seen banning instant messaging services, shutting down websites, conducting national digital surveillance in various states. Turkey, Russia, and many other places around the world offer examples of that. China, of course. Terry Flew has written about this, and I'm going to read this quote from him because it's quite eloquent. He wrote, "Internet governance has evolved around a complex mix of international laws and binding agreements, national regulations, legal judgments, industry self-regulation, and self-governance within the large digital platform companies. Any application of international norms and agreements remains very much dependent upon local regulations, and there has not been a wholesale transfer of sovereign powers from the nation state to international institutions. And we see this all the time when we hear about countries that take specific actions to police the internet." Flew argues that moving away from the multilateralism implicit in the structures of global media governance might lead to users across national jurisdictions experiencing the internet quite differently. In such a case, big global internet players are going to be confronted with a complex array of diverse, conflicting, and possibly contradictory laws and regulations across territorial boundaries. In turn, such a realization leads to the need of developing a reflexive balance between global networks and regional regulation. The result has been felt in the area of international law through the introduction of the idea of a global international law that has emerged as a central perspective that can help bring about the harmonization of the tension between these two opposite tendencies. As a matter of fact, Birnbach, in an article that was published earlier this year, argues that this global situation necessitates the formation of an ideal that would encompass both the local and global dimensions simultaneously, creating what he calls as the global net or the global internet. That is an idea that is currently used as a representation of how the internet is going to move forward. In conclusion, glocalization, I've argued, leads to two different forms of cultural heterogeneity with regard to the information communication technologies. On the one hand, we have the reconstruction of new digital or information communication dependent local places that anchor human bonds into newly found connections. While on the other hand, we might have the formation, the creation of new forms of local hybridity, of which the most widespread example may be the various forms of augmented reality or geomedia that have become ubiquitous in everyday life. I've tried to offer here examples and applications that render these different forms of glocalization concrete. In the current post-pandemic or post-globalization phase that we have, these features are very prominent. They force us to adopt more nuanced and careful analysis of existing complexities. And I would submit that globalization offers the means for understanding the consequences of the 21st century information communication revolution. I should add here that with that idea in mind, I have I'm in the process of developing a special issue on the topic of communication and globalization for the journal Frontiers in Communication. And I would invite you, those of you who are interested, to email me with more and ask for more information. And if you have work in that area, I would be certainly welcome it. And we can talk about what can be done with your work in the context of this special issue I'm developing. Of course, for more broader points, there is the Handbook of Culture and Globalization that came out earlier this year. That is currently in circulation, and it's a massive resource. So perhaps you can tell your library to at least get an e-copy. Thank you very, very much, and I hope you will able to hear me clearly, at least.
It's got time.
এটা দিয়ে দিলাম এটা আমার হলো না এটা না কে কোথায় উড়ে গেল এটা আমি তো পাচ্ছি না
I have query. Somewhere in the presentation, I noticed 2050 as the year where we would be the countries like India and China would be taking over or be at par. On what basis are we coming up with a supposition like that? Is there an incident? Are there parameters that you're looking at to arrive at a conclusion like that? So, implementable on that? Hello?
Thank you. I don't, Victor, could you hear that?
No, I have not.
The point you made about the addiction of being a key point in terms of countries like India and China kind of overtaking other countries, and what was the basis on which that prediction was made?
I'm hearing you speak, but there is a tremendous amount of echo, and I cannot make out what are the words.
Thank you, Victor. I think that question will be sent by text. Correspondence afterwards. So now I'm going to ask Professor Yeshi Choedan, who's going to be speaking about globalization, intrastate conflict, and conflict resolution.
Hello? Let's start. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, organizers, for inviting me for this international conference on globalization. My presentation today is globalization, interstate conflict, and conflict resolution. Now, the globalization is not just worldwide and worldwide deepening of interconnectedness. It also triggers marketization, liberalization, democratization, which cause unsettling effect on the developing countries. They have produced coercive consequences for the sovereignty of developing countries, leading to weak states or the failed state system, failed states in many of the developing countries. Most of the deadliest conflict in the globalized era have occurred within the border of a single country. And so the range of actors in these conflicts expanded significantly to include number of non-state entities also in this conflict. And there are studies which demonstrates that the rate of change in globalization and conflict has a positive correlation. There is a phenomenal increase in intrastate conflicts since the start of the present wave of globalization, as demonstrated in the chart of armed conflict types produced by Uppsala conflict data. Now, Uppsala conflict data categorize the armed conflict into 4 different types of conflict: extra-states, intrastate, international interstate conflict, internationalized intrastate, and then intrastate conflict. So in a sense that they are categorized into these 4 different conflicts, but what this particular paper is focusing is on the internationalized intrastate and intrastate conflicts. So these 2 later conflicts, as demonstrated in this chart, is primarily increased in the since the globalization, the present wave of globalization. The effect of globalization changed the very concept of security and peace in international relations. Security is no longer narrowly conceived in terms of military threat from the aggressor nations. There's a shift in the focus from the security of the state or security of the territory to the human security, with more focus on human-centric approach to security. The peace in the globalized era is no longer just absence of conflict between the states, that is just negative peace. In the present time, peace is now aimed to address the root cause of interstate conflict to bring about durable peace and stability in the conflict-affected states. That is, that the present time, the peace is kind of focusing on positive peace, not just negative peace. This presentation attempts to highlight the globalization is not just contribute to increase in intrastate conflict in international system, but also generated range of mechanism for resolution of such conflict. This presentation also intends to highlight why these mechanisms have not been effective in bringing about stable, durable peace in the conflict-affected countries. Now here I'm going to highlight the causes of the interstate conflict associated with the globalization. Now the globalization and liberalization have generated a sense of political and economic insecurity, leading to social economic crisis and intrastate conflict in many of the developing countries in the globalized era. And another major factor is a premature democratization introduced in many of the developing countries, causing ethnic and sectarian polarization of the society, leading to intrastate conflict. Another major cause of the interstate conflict associated with the globalization is that these globalization and its concomitant development weaken the state sovereignty, causing to bring about weak state or failed state system, leading to intrastate conflict. The globalization has also led to increase in a demand of the supply of high-value natural resources, due to which several groups within the country compete to control and profit from the country's natural resources. The government of these states, government of the resource-rich states were unable to check these warring groups, leading to conflict over natural resources. Interstate conflicts such as those in Liberia, Angola, Democratic Republic of Congo have centered on a high-value resources like timber, diamond, gold, mineral, and oil. So the globalization also facilitated the involvement of multiple actors in the interstate conflict, and in some cases, these internal conflicts being internationalized, with many outside states involved directly or indirectly in these intrastate internal conflicts. So globalization also facilitated easy diffusion of the small arms and the light weapons, which are the weapons of choice of these warring groups within in the internal conflicts. So easy access to these weapons made it possible for conflicting groups to resort to violent conflict in the globalized era. Now I'm going to highlight some of the factors which facilitated, some of the factors which led to development of the mechanism for conflict resolution by the globalization. So one of the major factors is a worldwide interconnectedness, specifically development of communication and transportation technology. These led to the raise in public awareness of events unfolding in various corners of the world. Public awareness in the developed countries led to pressurize the government to do something to respond to the humanitarian crisis in the interstate conflict. Under such public pressure, as well as national interests of the West major powers, globalization facilitated in generating plethora of conflict resolution mechanism. One such mechanism is the peace operation. Due to the change situation of the post-Cold War and the new wave of globalization, it became possible for liberal interpretation of the UN Charter provisions to accept intrastate conflict as a threat to international peace and security. During the Cold War period, up till the Cold War period, any things happened within the country were regarded as a domestic matters, and the United Nations have a strict principle of non-interference in internal matters. This underwent a drastic change in the globalized era. So due to the liberal interpretation of the UN Charter, it became possible for the United Nations to deploy peacekeeping operation as a mechanism to deal with the intrastate conflicts. Realizing that there's hardly any peace to keep in such intrastate conflict, the concept of peacekeeping operation has undergone change to peace operation. So instead of peacekeeping operation, now it's referred to as a peace operation, because there's hardly any peace to keep in those intrastate conflict. Such operations were given a multi-dimensional task, such as monitoring the ceasefire between the warring factions, a deterrent operation against some of the warring factions, protection of these innocent civilians in the conflict areas, demobilization and reintegration of the different warring factions, reconstruction activities and humanitarian support to the local population, election-related tasks and maintaining law and order in the conflict area, and security sector reform, and so on. So major problem in this mechanism to deal with the intrastate conflict is that there is no serious thought has been given as to how to implement this expensive mandate. No commensurate resource have been provided to carry out this mandated task by the United Nations. This mismatch between the task and the resources is one of the major causes for the ineffectiveness of the UN peace operation to address this intrastate conflict. Another major mechanism which has been developed in the globalized era is a humanitarian intervention to deal with the humanitarian crisis created by the intrastate conflict. The new devices have been developed for humanitarian interventions, such as deployment of military forces by the coalition of willing, for example, in case of Somalia in 1992, Haiti in 1994. And another devices is one country-led operations such as French deployment in Mali in 2013, deployment of other international organizations such as NATO in Liberia in 2011, African Union and Burundi in 2003. These developments by other agencies and actors, although authorized by the United Nations, most of them, it has no control over these operations as nor they have accountability to the United Nations. These other deployments have been perceived as directed more by the national interests of the Western countries, and they did not bring about stable peace in the conflict-affected countries. Invariably, the United Nations peace operation has been deployed to clean up the mess created by these other agencies in the conflict-affected countries. Another mechanism is a peace-building mechanism to deal with this intrastate conflict. This mechanism attempts to deal with the root causes of the conflict so that stable, sustainable peace could be established in the conflict-affected countries. Apart from the UN peace operation, many other actors and agencies are involved in a peace-building effort in the conflict-affected countries. Through the peace-building mechanism, the Western countries try to rebuild the conflict-affected countries in their own image. The major problem of the peace-building effort of the Western country is their focus on addressing the governance gap, that is, introduction of the democratic system of governance in the conflict area, instead of actually focusing on developing capacity building. Not just political capacity, but social economic capacity to reestablish a durable peace and security in the conflict affected area. So their focus try to deal with the governance gap instead of capacity gap in the conflict affected countries. Although these mechanisms have elevated some of the human harms caused by the interstate conflict, they have not been effective in bringing about stable, sustainable peace due to the certain lacuna as discussed above. In fact, there's a report of recurrence of conflict in many of the conflict-affected countries, that is relapsing back to the conflict after carrying out peacekeeping and peace building. In certain instances, outside interference, specifically the military intervention, exaggerated the situation, conflict areas, as was the case in NATO intervention in Afghanistan in 2000 onwards, and Libya in 2011. So in conclusion, I would say that this presentation attempt to show that interface between the globalization and intrastate conflict is dynamic. It shows the globalization contributed to the cause of interstate conflict in the developing countries. Globalization also facilitated various conflict resolutions mechanisms with the aim to bringing about stable, durable peace in the conflict-affected states. However, due to various lacunae in operation of these mechanisms, they have not been effective in bringing about durable resolution of the conflict. Thus, the globalization threatens the existing global order by contributing to the cause and increase in intrastate conflict in the world without any sign of emergence of new order to deal effectively peace and security issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yeshi. If we have any question, one or two question quickly we may have. So, okay, no problem. I think later you can, if you have any question, you can have. Yeah, so now we have a brilliant scholar and researchers, our new speaker, Dr. Mona Sehgal. She is from Department of Training and Professional Development and Education in NIPA, Delhi. She is going to speak on COVID-19 pandemic and learning deficit in school, exploring pathways through integration of ICT in pedagogical practice in the global context. Thank you, Dr. Mona. Yeah. Would you like to speak from here?
Or I can speak from there. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I think I'm in this session just, as a filler, you must take it that first of all. So first of all, thank you so much to all the organizers for giving me the space to speak in this particular session. Since, the COVID-19 pandemic is one of the very important issues, and how the globe, when we are looking at the global context, there had been a very major learning deficit which has been reported by the World Bank and the other UN organizations. When we are looking at the pandemic, we are just not only looking at that how it has disrupted the ways, but it has also created some of the new pathways in the different directions. And specifically, when we are looking at the school education, one finds that the school education had been integrating the ICT at the global level for almost 1.5 decades prior to it. But the COVID has accelerated the integration of technology into the pedagogical processes. So the whole argument, of this paper and the attempt is basically to explore that how there has been a change in the landscape of school education due to the outbreak of the pandemic in the 2019, when globally the schools were closed. And though the schools were closed virtually, but the learning had still been going on, and especially when we are looking at in the Indian context. And also the online teaching became the only mode of learning. Now that is one of the points which is very, very critical, and also that how we are using the technology, because we still have a long way to look into the use of the technology at the different levels. And I think we can see that we are still into the process of making a foolproof kind of a hybrid system, which, is one of the very major arguments, which we are actually trying to do it. Also, when we are looking at this changing scenario, there are various issues which are related to the access, equity, and quality. And specifically, when we are looking at it, in the context of the digital divide, which is much more crucial, because that's something which, this paper is trying to explore, that how we can really be looking into this uncalled situation, and also how it has actually complicated complicated with the issue of providing a digital platform to all the children. And this is one of the very much unexplored areas still, because, I think we'll be needing at least, another 5 to 6 years to really, bring out the issues which are going to be much more, to be seen in terms of the leading the future deliberations in the context of the globalization. The analysis of the various trends in the use of technology, it makes major headways in the last 2 decades, but it has also transformed the face and shape of school education. due to the COVID-19, because that had been the major thing, which I would like to focus on. Also, when we are looking at the context, all the contexts are very varied. And specifically, when, there is an attempt to look into the World Bank's classification of the low, lower middle, upper middle, and high income countries, all these particular specifications, the classifications, are giving you the different kinds of outcomes in terms of also acceptance of the technology, and how the digital divide is actually much more wide at the global level when we are looking at the low income countries into the level. Also, the very important point is that if you are looking at the various other factors which are related to the location, what is the management of the schools, the infrastructure, the human resources which are available. It would also need that there needs to be a differentiated approach in terms of the pedagogical transactions. We cannot have the one model, which can be really applied into the same way, the way we are actually looking at it. So, if you're looking at the remote learning, which needs to be more effective, there's a requirement that we must have the similar kind of enabling environment, which are in the context of the effective teachers, because of course, it also requires that when we are looking at the pedagogy, the very important component and the stakeholder is the teacher, how that teacher is actually trained. Do we really, because, these teachers have to use the technology all of a sudden, and, there had no preparedness, in terms of how to use the technology. Second is what kind of technology will be very, very suitable, and especially if you're looking at the different classification of the countries as per the income groups, one finds that, where we are already struggling with the issues which are related to the low expenditure on education in most of the countries due to the various reasons, one finds that there are going to be the differentiated levels also in which, the technology has to be looked at. So either you're looking at using the online classes, or are we looking at the use of the media, that is in terms of the media for making any kind of media centers where you're using the television as a part of the teaching and learning, because your pedagogies will change as per the context. And also, how do you engage the learners when we are talking about using the ICT into the school education? This is one of the very important aspect, which we had been focusing on. So as far as I think you had to go previous, I think I have to talk about the concept. One more slide back. Yeah. So if you're looking at the conceptual framework which is being used in terms of that, how do we really look into the remote learning? There had been a report by the World Bank, which talks about the three major components. The first is that how the teacher is, skilled if they have to really talk about teaching at the different locations and teaching remotely. Because a teacher can be more effective only when you are actually having a face-to-face interaction, specifically in the school education, because this paper is exploring the levels, which we are looking at it. It may be much better when we are looking at the higher grades, into the school education. Also, when we are talking about how do you engage the learners, it is very, very difficult for a teacher to do that very remotely in the school education, and which had been something which has been experienced at the different levels of time. So I think you can go to the next slide, please. So when we are looking at this conceptual framework, which is being developed graphically, which is being represented, it talks about three different layers. One is the teachers, the technology, and the learners, how these the learners are engaged, how the teachers are skilled, and also the technology has to be made available at each and every level. So this is something which is going to be very, very critical, specifically if you're looking at these surveys which are done by the World Bank. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So when we are looking at the responses which has been collected by the World Bank, it has been pointed out that the online media which is being used is around 91%. While when we are looking at the television which is used for the doing the continuing the education at the different levels of time, it actually stated that the television is used as a media, which is around 85%. The paper-based take-home materials which were provided in the different countries had been around 82%, while there has been 70% of the mobiles which have been used for doing and continuing the online teaching. Now, also we have seen that the mobile revolution had been there in the middle of the 1990s, when we are looking at the different levels. So if we are talking about the strategies which are to be used, we can see that when we are looking at the South Asia and the other North American countries, where you will find that it depends on the what kind of income group the countries are belonging to. The use of technology will be varied and much more differentiated at the different levels of the way. Can you go next, please? So I think since I think we have very limited time, there are also various initiatives which have been taken up in terms of the countries which where a lot of support was provided by the World Bank to the different countries also during the pandemic time, like they had specific case study on the Nicaragua, Sierra Leone, and many other countries where it has been found that the different countries would be having different kinds of responses based on how it is being seen at the different levels of time. Also, if we are looking at that, what are we actually learning? The first is that when we are looking at the issues and challenges, the first would be based on that, if we are really looking at the the responses which needs to be seen in the context of the remote learning, how do you actually address the socioeconomic inequalities also? Because in the global context, one sees that there are different layers in which we are talking about how to make the education accessible. The second is also that we are looking at that the students, they are not able to have the access in a very comfortable manner due to the very major issue, that is the medium of instruction. Because when you're teaching online, you cannot be doing multi or the bilingual formula which is usually being used is not very comfortable for the teacher, because one is you're not even aware that the third also is that that are all the parents really being able to support the remote learning for their children? That is one of the another very major challenge which had been pointed out during the COVID period. And also, if you're talking about the homeschooling, it actually also focuses that there's going to be a lot of focus on the gender biases also, because the women who are at the home will be taking much more time, and probably also it has coincided with the other economic things also at the various points of time. So when we are looking at the way forward, sorry, this is my last slide, I'll just take a minute to finish off. One must be very careful that as I said, that it has to be a differentiated kind of an approach globally which needs to be used when we are talking about how do you ensure the remote learning which is taking place. Also, teacher effectiveness is one of the very important issues, that the teacher effectiveness could be there when we are skilling them up with the changing environment as and when the things are required. The other is that usually when we are using the online media, it's a one-way communication, since you have a class of minimum like 15 to maximum 40 students. How do they really respond back and then really look? So the interaction is usually, it's like a monologue which happens. Also, there has to be a very strong engagement of the parents as well as the students, so that they are able to report on the different kinds of, issues and challenges which are actually being there. The other and the last point, which is very important, is that, how do all the stakeholders really make a part of the learning process? Because all the stakeholders, that is the students, the teachers, as well as the parents, have to be a part when you're talking of the online learning. And that had been a very major change at the global arena. Thank you so much for providing this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mona. It was really very interesting theme that you covered. Is there any questions from audience?
Have you done empirical study on this, or it is?
No, it is only a review of the secondary sources which will be done, because there was a report which came. Global report which has been, no, it's okay. I think I'm audible. We are just a small group. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. So there is a report which is called the learning deficit. And that is how I got more interested. And also, since we are in the, institute which talks about the planning and management. School education is one of the very critical area, and where we found that also which level of schooling we are talking about. So within the school level also, if you're talking about the primary level, you will have a different kind of responses. But when we are looking at the higher education in the school context, I'm saying like the higher grades, then it is having a different kind of response. So it is also, the teacher skills have to be differentiated, and mostly since we had the smart classes and the use of technology since the last 2 decades, it's not that it was new. But during the COVID, the major point is that, how the different countries which are falling into the different income groups are responding to this particular challenge. Specifically, if you're looking at the African region, we already are aware that there are many issues in terms of that very little money is coming to education from you usually have the external aids, which are being used specifically for retaining the education. So that was the reason why I thought I'll just do, one kind of a access to the secondary education, the secondary data, and also to see that what is the landscape which actually has again changed. Because though, these changes these differentials had already been there in terms of the income groups. But during the COVID, I think the countries had been really very much hard hit in terms of the education.
Then I asked you this
Yeah.
question was, even we are now talking of globalization.
Yes.
Even within our country, we have large number of heterogeneity.
Yes.
You talk of rural area, you talk of tribal area, you talk of urban area with poor slums and people who cannot afford the ICT devices. At some places, ICT devices are not affordable, not present. And then what happens to the student? You talked of one aspect. There are many other aspects which needs to be studied. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Yeah.
Yeah.
मतलब हो गया तुम्हारा काम?
Thank you, ma'am, for the wonderful presentation. And this is my research area. Actually, I am working on the same area. And my topic is smartphone and educational performance of school-going children in the JJ colonies. So as sir mentioned, the empirical aspect of the field. So I have collected data in COVID time. So my question is that you are seeing this educational landscape from three perspectives: teachers, skill training, students, accessibility of the device, and then technology. But when if we leave COVID, if we just ignore the COVID circumstance, we generally take the third component as socio-cultural reality, the milieu of the child, when we talk about education. So when now earlier times that child used to go to school, now school is coming to the child's home in the form of smartphone. So how much this social milieu will impact their education? Because we all know that UNESCO is telling that 6 million girls were at the risk of losing the education when COVID came.
And the reason was also the social milieu. When we talk about the JJ colony slums and the urban marginal and the rural marginalities. So the how, because I couldn't see the aspect of social milieu in this presentation.
Various origins was from China, and I don't know how people can neglect it, and some later we have been seeing that how assertive they have been their approach for years. If we do not do so, we are very well aware, and we have been trying to balance the art to different ways. Post-COVID-19, things have not been good. We can still feel that effect in our economy in all the sectors. It will take time to recover because a lot of damage has been done. Whereas
look at it with a very broader concept. It cannot be, because we all do the researches which are we all know are limited to a particular area, where we are looking at. And specifically when your particular area is, of course, I know that it's talking about the poor economic status, of the parents, who are sending their children, and they will have a lot of limitations in terms of the accessibility to the education, to the technological things. But let me also tell you, we also have, if I'm talking about the Indian context, we do have the usage of the specific educational satellite channels which are already going on at the different times, which are there. And there is a lot of use of the community radio programs also in certain places. So there are many other methods, which are being incorporated with the use of the ICT at the different levels. So I think that will be again very context specific, as I said. So
This is one of the very burning.
I had a question for Professor Choedan. So I think you gave a really sort of convincing argument of the problems with both international military interventions by actors other than the United Nations, and also United Nations interventions, and as you say, where there's very little peace to keep. So what role can they actually play there? And I was just interested to know what your view is, whether you think there is a potentially useful role or some kind of armed intervention in those situations, even if it needs to be very different to the way it's been done so far, or if you think just the fundamental premise is flawed, the idea that an outside force coming in can help things.
Yeah, thank. In a sense that definitely the humanitarian intervention is different from authorization of use of force to the peacekeeping operation under Chapter 7. So in a sense that use of force is already allowed for the UN peacekeepers, but that is not a humanitarian intervention. So use of force on certain restricted issues being allowed by the UN mandate itself. But this kind of using the name of humanitarian to interfere in internal matters and then set up a government according to the preference of the Western countries, as they did in Iraq or in terms of Libya. So those things are damaging to the international order, world order, rather than facilitating peace and security in the world.
Thank you.
Okay. So Tom, would you like to give your comments on all this presentation? Then we can finish here.
Yeah, well, I just had an overall really kind of observation, just kind of inspired by all three presentations, and it's as much a kind of methodological observation as anything else. That I think in different ways, all three presentations have emphasized the importance of looking in detail at local contexts to understand how these kind of global processes actually play out and the impact that they actually have in people's lives. And I think that really kind of calls for the importance of sharing and collaboration, because no one of us by ourselves can investigate all those different local contexts and establish the kind of emerging patterns and kind of variations in these processes. So I think it, it emphasized the importance of events like this and, journal special issues, kind of editor collections, things that can bring together the work of different people working in different contexts and then build on that. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, so thank you, friends, for this wonderful session. I think now it is over. We will be again meeting at 4:15. So this session is break for the tea. Okay, thank you. We have to felicitate Mr. Surgeon. Yeah, please come, and Mona, you also please come. Yeah, please come. Yeah. Yeah, felicitate. Yeah, please come. Pankaj. Now I request Professor Bipul Somani sir. So please felicitate Professor Yeshi. Yeah. हाँ वो फोटो कहाँ है कहाँ गया फोटो हाँ
Thinking this is very, formal thing.
वहाँ से
But now for record, it is important.
Yes.
You can't get accredited if you don't have a.
Have a record of it.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Now I request Titi madam. So please felicitate. आप जी. Now. अच्छा मैं तृप्ति ने बोल दिया. Yeah. Madhav, best. Can we proceed? Yes, we can now proceed. Yeah.